Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Read Baby Read. I'm Kenneth.
I'm Josh.
And now we'll be introducing Tash Aw's book. We'll be introducing two books, both also by Tash Aw. First one is The South, and the second one is his personal memoir, Strangers on a Pier. So before we begin, we would just like to give a brief introduction to this Malaysian author, Tash Aw. So Tash Aw's parents were born into families that live deep in the heart of the Malaysian countryside, on either side of the mountain range that splits the country in two. Both are the children of immigrants from southern China. So basically, his mother's side settled in Perak, not Punta, but Perak, which I made a mistake previously. So and his father's side was practically sort of like a nomad. So basically, they travel from Kelantan and a series of townships, but in the end, they settled in, if I'm not mistaken, in Kuala Krai. So yeah. So Tash is born in Taiwan, and in the end, the family moved back to Malaysia when he was 2, and he grew up and was educated in Petaling Jaya, as explained in his own personal memoir, before again leaving to England to read law at the University of Cambridge and Warwick. I believe he also has a degree or a master in creative writing, if I'm not mistaken.
From East Anglia University.
So yes, so that's Tash. And for the first segment, we'll be reviewing his book, his fiction book, his latest fiction book. And I was told that it's a quartet. So basically, this will be the first of a 4-series book.
Exactly.
So it's The South. Okay. So I'm just gonna start first, Josh. Is that I'm not a big fan of fiction, to be honest with you.
Neither am I.
As you can see, you got Thatcher, you got Tony Blair.
Exactly.
And I can
I'm more
assure
into
you,
politics, history, current affairs, culture.
And I figured the last book, book that I remember reading, which is of fiction of any kind, is Harry Potter actually. So yeah, but I like it. I like it plainly because it speaks about a Chinese urban boy. His family suffered from the financial crisis in 1999. Yes, and they decided to take a break. So the family went back to the south. So went back to the south. So predominantly he was in the north, in the urbanized area. So this boy, along with his family, go back to the south in a piece of land that was owned by his family. So there is where he found his belonging, and he found something that he couldn't find in the city life.
Yep, correct. This basically is about a family with a story of a family with another family, and these families are related in the sense that both fathers of the two families are actually half siblings, one legitimate, one illegitimate. So they both have a son, and these two sons actually start some kind of a romantic relationships. So that's why when this book first came out a couple of months ago, in February and March, and there was a bit of a controversy. Someone from an organization, a Malaysian Muslim organization called
International
Women's Alliance for Women Institution, Family Institution and Quality Education, WAFIC. One of the members of this particular organization happened to read a review of the book on The Guardian, the British newspaper, and she didn't like it because from right at the beginning, there is this scenes of these two boys having intimate relationships together, and she actually called out the book and reported to the Ministry of Home Affairs. And as you know, it's very common in Malaysia these days that a lot of people started commenting on the book, supporting the action of this particular member of WAFIC to report the book to the Minister of Home Affairs. And I know that one of a prominent bookstores in KL allegedly removed the book from the shelf as a result. But I know that many other bookstores still carry the book, so you can still find the book. I think what this particular incident shows is that there is this increased moral and religious policing on the part of a certain segment of Malaysian society on books or any publications that are not in line with their religious or their family values. This is actually an increasing worrying phenomenon as far as we are concerned. And of course, from their perspective, they probably think that they are doing something right because they are defending their religion, they're defending traditional family values and all that. However, we have to understand, in many of the books, novels today, even the romance novels, intimate relationships, more often than not, is part of the story. But because these intimate relationships mostly involve heterosexual people, like between men and women, boys and girls, so they don't create as much controversy as the South. Because the South, right at the beginning, has a scene on the intimate relationship between two teenage boys. By the name of Jay and Chuan.
And if we look beyond obviously the homosexuality and things like this, we can see that it's much more about a book about. Of course, we need to emphasize that part of Jay's finding of himself is where he met Chuan, this attractive young boy who is from the field, from the South, which he happens to meet. So we also don't want to. Me and Josh also, we don't want to spoil. We don't want to give a lot of spoilers on the book because we want to encourage people to read about it. But let's ignore the homosexuality part a bit and just talk about how when he first go to the when he first come to the village, there was this contrast, this contrast that he found that he observed that I found that to be very revealing to me is the sense that he found that he was from the city, but he was very lonely. But Chuan, as a boy who is very,
who is relatively more experienced,
who is relatively
more and more worldly in some sense,
worldly, and came from a less urbanized place, seemed to be less lonely in the sense that he has a good friend, he has a good female friend, which Jay has some jealousy on, and things like that. So. And it also speaks about how this boy begins to find himself in the padang, in the field, you know?
It is actually about a journey of a boy in discovering himself, whether his sexuality, his maturity, his ideas about life, his ideas about friendship, or even his relationship with his own father and all that. So this book is actually a lot more than just, intimate relationship between two boys. It is about, the process of growth. Involving two teenage boys and their friends, and also the social setting at the time, and how they interact with their parents, and how they deal with family issues, conflicts, and all that. It's a beautiful story. However, because of this controversy, so people tend to focus more on the so-called the homosexual elements of the book. Not to say that I'm not in favor of having this sort of contents in a novel, but I just like to emphasize that. Whenever you grab a book, and the book actually speaks more, much more than just intimate relationships and in all that. You should go and identify what this story is really about. It is about human beings. It's about family. It's about love. It's about friendships and how they interact with guys, how they interact with girls, and all that. It's all about two boys growing up in an urban and rural setting, and also the contradictions, the conflicts, the feelings of. The conflicting feelings about someone, the family members and all that. What really worries me is that if people dwell so much on the intimate relationship part of the book and report the book to the authorities in the hope that the state would take action against any publication not to their liking, not to their traditional value and all that, we could end up suppressing the creativity of many potential Malaysian writers, Malaysian artists, and this is really this could actually entail a long-term consequences without those people knowing it. You see, that's why I'm not in favor of anyone taking action on this book just because the book contains a certain elements not that doesn't confirm to their religious or traditional values. And this also brings out the question about activism, because we know that a lot of activism in Malaysia today happens online. You know, people go online to mobilize people. You know, they advertise their activities. They call on people to join their collective action against something or for something. So activism, when we talk about activism, the word itself does have a positive connotation. However, we also know that as we move things online, as we start to be more involved on, you know, in online activities and all that, you can see that even the opposing side or you know, on a certain issue would also go online and mobilize their own people against our cause. So how do we deal with these sort of contradictions? That's why over the last few years, we started to see a lot of you know, disputes, controversies over religious issues, racial issues, and all these things. And I think Malaysia is still struggling to deal with this sort of phenomenon, being a multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural society. I think different communities are trying to deal with this sort of a phenomenon, a new phenomenon, but very challenging phenomenon.
I completely agree with Josh and what he said. And somebody would ask, this is Read Baby Read, this is doing book review, and why do we need to go over the hills to talk about this online activism? And we are frankly doing a disservice to Mr. Tash Aw, who is help promoting Malaysia in an international scale. Why we are doing this is because, plainly because why we need to speak this out is because in Read Baby Read, we obviously promote the joy of reading, but most importantly, we want to promote a diversity of ideas. You know, if you ask me, do we probably have a lot of things that we agree with Mr. Tash Aw, but there are bound to be things that we disagree, you know, but still we read books. And just to put it to a more example, me and Josh, we read tons of books, right? I presume. But there are books that we felt not right after finish reading it, and we felt like there's a waste of time. I felt there was this book called by Eric Kaufman called White Shift. We can talk about that book later and all this. And I find a lot of points I disagree with a lot of what Eric Kaufman said in White Shift, but I still find it an enjoyable read. So we want to encourage our listener, our viewers, to look beyond this, even in the stricter stance that we appreciate, we understand that you probably came from a socially conservative background, that you may not agree to homosexuality. This book, I would argue that all Chinese for the 90s should read it, because it reflects on a lot of things that what we do at that time. Because I'm from the 90s, you know. For example, Jay would talk about he listened to Leslie Cheung and Anita Mui, you know. And I came from a city boy. I'm a city boy. I'm from Ipoh, and Josh always laughed at me for never having been to kampong or never ever lived a rural life. That's why I was a bit of culture shock whenever I see a lot of things like I used to get stage fright. I used to be afraid of mouse and things like that. But in Jay, he is of someone with a similar setting, you know. And I also wanted to say something very personal, is that I would not spoil my viewers and listeners about it, but it is a family that I could empathize. Like, he has a traditionally very strict father who refused to open up, and he also has a mother who tolerated his father's promiscuity. Not that say that my dad is promiscuous, but it's just that we see a lot of traditional Chinese families had a lot of these things. And Tash was just merely writing an experience about himself in a fictionalized manner. So, and most of all, this book is internationally recognized, and I'm sure people who does not have a good history about the experience of straight Chinese, Nanyang Huaran, straight Chinese, would came to appreciate what this unique, this very special trait that we have, you know. So
Okay, Kenneth just mentioned about this promiscuous father from a traditional Chinese family, but of course we understand promiscuity and infidelity can happen in any other society. It's not just about the Chinese community. However, what is unique about Tash Aw's books is that he opens up about all these things, and he openly talks about this, and he encourages people to actually discuss this sort of phenomenon, whether promiscuity on the part of a father or even on the mother would have impact on the children's growth, and also would that affect their relationship, intimate relationship between the parents and the child. So this book is really a lot more about homosexuality and all that. And to me, as I was reading this book, I wasn't dwelling so much on the intimate relationship between Chuan and Jay or the homosexuality or whatever. Actually, I'm more interested in how Jay is trying to discover his own masculinity and identity as a growing boy. And I think in some way he's trying to affirm his identity through
it helps him
Chuan
grow as a person.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
So if we look again, ignore the homosexuality if you find it disagreeable, but you can't deny that in that story, what Tash was trying to say is that Chuan helped Jay to grow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But
because Chuan is definitely, to be very honest, as I was reading this book,
yeah.
in some way I can very much relate to Chuan because I started working at a very young age, whereas pretty much like Chuan because he had working experience by the time he met Jay, whereas Jay is sort of like he comes across as someone who is really from a rural background and a very closed-up family and also a very innocent boy. And Chuan is more worldly, more mature in
Brought
that
him
sense.
to a different world.
Yeah, exactly. So Chuan actually opens up a different world and different possibilities for Jay. Yeah, to me that is the theme, one of the key themes of the book. Yeah, and I have to say I just happened to be in London the last couple of weeks ago, and this book actually received an awful lot of attention and also critical review from many of the members of the literary circle in the UK, and I happened to see quite a few bookshops like Gaze the Word in Bloomsbury, and also Hatchet's, one of the oldest bookstores in London, and also Waterstones, and all these bookshops actually displays the book in a very prominent position, so which shows that this book has received critical review in the UK. So I really encourage people to read the book. Yeah, regardless of whatever that happened, whether you agree or disagree with the content of the book, whether you agree with whether you so strongly adhere to your traditional religious values,
or
that
you disagree with
you
Jay's
disagree with the
coming
kind
of age
exactly,
sexuality.
that's right. I think the precious thing is that even as of now, we are still able to talk about and discuss the book openly. As of now, I cannot be certain about future. Yeah, right. Yeah.
We most of all, just to end this before we move into Strangers on the Pier. Do you have anything to add, Josh? Before
no, I think that's all about the book.
Yeah, but the most important thing is that we want to engage this in a civilized manner, because a lot of times people just got turned off of Tash Aw's portrayal of this protagonist. It's much more than that. Trust me, it's much more than that.
Yeah.
Even though I made a mistake of talking about Chinese in Malaysia must read this. I think in some ways, if you are a Malay, and you sort of like look back in the 90s, the rural life in fondness, Tash also described it vividly, and to the credit of Tash, he brought this story out of Malaysia, Shouldn't we be proud of it, of doing that? And as people learn more about the story of straight Chinese, the Malays' life, and all this. Yeah. So I think it is a celebration.
Yeah, I actually, during the, when the controversy came out, I followed some of the comments quite closely. There was someone who commented that, Tash Aw's story is not a Malaysian story. It doesn't represent Malaysia and this and that. So this brings out the question of who has the right to claim authenticity about a certain country, about a certain society. Because Malaysia is a country made out of how many people? Like 33, 34 million. Everybody has a unique story. Everybody has a different story. So to me, there is nothing called a standard Malaysian story, right? And because everyone's story, everyone's life experiences are different. So that's why I think from this book, it depicts and portrays a different side of Malaysian society, and we should read and try to read and understand and discuss the book rather than just dismiss the book out of hand by saying that, oh yeah, it doesn't represent Malaysia, this is not a typical Malaysian story. The guy lives in the UK, he has been away from the country for so long, he doesn't understand the country anymore. Maybe he has been he has been badly received all this bad influence from Western society, from the UK and all that. I think we should stop saying this sort of thing and try to understand why people write a book from a certain perspective and a certain point of view. Yeah.
And he came back and did interviews with a few media channels and promote a book in a bookshop. So it's practically untrue and false information that he's saying that this guy is just living in UK, peeling off his experience in Malaysia. I'm sure Mr. Tash Aw is a...
Yeah, I should have attended the session at the bookshop, but I missed it. Yeah,
he loves Malaysian as much as we all do, if there is a patriotic sense of him.
Exactly, that's right. Oh, wow. Okay, not to say that I agree with patriotism. I think, personally, I would like to see more Malaysians, the diasporic community of Malaysians, to write more of their stories, because many of their stories can actually shed a light on different life experiences and how they look at Malaysia. Having been away for a certain number of years, they probably acquire a different perspective. Their view of Malaysia is probably influenced by their different experiences in different countries, and that would also help us understand Malaysia as a country. There is not just one single story. I'm definitely not in favor of a single story. There should be multiple stories about certain society, certain country, and all that.
And that it applies even more in a multiracial, multicultural country, Malaysia.
Exactly. Even more so.
That's a good way to end the first segment, and we'll be back later. Check it out. Hello, welcome back to the second segment of Read Baby Read episode 2. So for this segment, it'll be a bit long because we'll talk about the second book, which is a memoir of Tash Aw, which was released before The South, is Strangers on a Pier. So just before we officially begin, I just want to read out the first very few words that Tash wrote for this book. Is that obviously it's a memoir. So I'm reading it. It says that I am in a taxi in Bangkok. My companion, European white, speaks fluent Thai. But every time he says something, the taxi driver turns to me with the reply, I shake my head. Pok ma pen Thai, which means I don't speak Thai. I'm not Thai. Tash Aw continues. I'm not Thai, not Thai. He continues to address me, not my friend. I am the passive conduit for this strange tripartite conversation. So, Josh, from this, we can just bring in an introduction of this memoir. So, what is Tash Aw trying to talk about in this memoir? Memoir,
this book is really about a man who grew up in Petaling Jaya, but most of his relatives happen to be in the small towns, rural areas, countryside. Pretty much like me, because I remember as I was growing up in Kota Tinggi in southern Johor, most of my relatives actually are in Malacca. So every year we had to travel back to Malacca for Chinese New Year, for other festivals, for Cheng Meng and all this, at least 2 or 3 times a year. And I clearly remember this sense of alienation when I was back in Malaysia with all my cousins, and they talk about things that I didn't understand. They talked about the neighborhoods, they talked about the river, they talked about certain things that were unique to Malacca, and whereas I could only watch from the sideline, feeling like an outsider. So I think this book actually explains very well this sense of alienation as a boy who grew up in an urban setting with strong connections in rural areas, and that actually helped him over the years. And this experience helped him to negotiate his identity and also to develop his own strategy in dealing with different social settings. For example, he writes in the book that when he's back in his grandmother's hometown, and then he would adopt the local accent, he would behave like a country boy so that people wouldn't discover his real identity,
And
being an urban boy.
and the older he gets, when he find that there is a limit for him to that he couldn't adapt anymore, he just stay quiet.
Yes, there is a limit to pretending. Yes, there is a limit to pretending to be a local, and I think we have a lot of similar experiences in that sense. So this is the first part of the book. Is very interesting. It's about his negotiations, about his own identities between urban and rural settings, and the second part is very much about his grandmother and all these things. So, Kenneth, you started by saying like, Tash happens to be in Bangkok and with a white friend, and the Thai taxi driver starts speaking Thai to him rather than the Farang. In Thailand, Thai people call white people Farang, right? Oh. So it's like he finds it awkward because he doesn't speak Thai, whereas the white friend actually speaks pretty fluent Thai. I mean, I assume, and this actually is something that I can very much relate to because I lived in Thailand. I lived and worked in Thailand for on and off for about 4 to 5 years. I remember every time I got into a taxi, I got into a shop, whether the taxi driver or sales assistant would start talking to me in Thai, and then I often have to say that, Kon Malaysia, put Thai mai dai. I'm Malaysian, I don't speak Thai. And then the person would be smiling and says like, oh, same like Thai, same Thai, same Thai. It's like, you are just like us. It's like, and I think what really intrigues me is the way that Tash Aw analyzes this phenomenon by saying that, when a Thai person says same like us, it is a kind of like it is an attempt to include you, in their community, so that they would feel safe communicating with you because you are part of them.
Yes.
So they whenever they see a Chinese or Thai looking person, they will start talking to the person in Thai, in order to make themselves feel comfortable, because I live in Thailand. I know, like I think in overall Thai society is still not very comfortable in dealing with foreigners. Yes, that's right. Because most of them don't speak very good English, unlike Malaysia or Singapore or the Philippines or India and all these like former British colonies. And also Thailand is a homogeneous ostensibly homogeneous society. But within the society, I know there are a lot of differences and all that. But outwardly, they present Thailand as at least they have a shared language, which is Thai, and then they have a shared collective identity, which is belonging to a Thai nation. So this experience actually very much reflects what I experienced when I lived in Thailand. I often have this dilemma. I remember having a few like American or Australian colleagues, again like white man or woman who happens to speak fluent Thai, at least decent Thai, being able to communicate easily with Thai people, whereas me, looking like a Thai person, not being able to speak Put Thai mai dai, not being able to speak Thai. Nit noi, I speak just a little bit of Thai. So it's like a lot of these Thai people that I met in Thailand found it very confusing, like why I don't speak Thai, right? So it's just like I often had to explain like, I'm not from Thailand, I just happen to be a Malaysian of Chinese origin and this and that.
And we use that first opening, that opening line as sort of like an introduction to this book, is because there is always a confusion. Maybe Josh would disagree with the use of confusion, but I would persist of using a word confusion because he was constantly confused about his identity. Because there was this anecdote saying that when he was in Nepal or in Indonesia, he was being recognized as part of the local
Gurung from Nepal or Chinese Indonesian. Yes,
because as Tash Aw himself has said in his memoir, he has a neutral face. And this is only a sort of like of what he wants to dive deeper, is that there is this constant search of identity, because we can delve more about the identity, but if you read the book, there's this just one important thing we want to talk about as family, is that this book is incomplete, at least for the first part. It's incomplete because it started off as something of an interview that he tried to ask his dad about what his forebears are, what his ancestors did and all, and did, trying to recollect his father's memory in order to write this book.
Yeah.
And this book will tell you that it's incomplete because his dad refused to say anything. Yes, and you would say that, wow, this is just a lazy author, right?
Yeah.
But it was done in a very delicate manner. It's because only straight Chinese who came from Nanyang, Chinese who came to Malaysia would understand this sentimentality. It's because we always, chances are, we are brought up by families
Yeah.
who refuse to talk about their past, who refuse to talk about the past precisely because their past is an immigrant past,
Yeah.
is a migrant past. Nobody would relish talking about their immigration background, but rather they would want to talk about how they came from rags to
Yeah.
riches. And this goes back to a point where Tash has mentioned that there is this phenomenon, I would call it a phenomenon, which is apparently more and more obvious these days, that there is this need for immigrants or second or third generation immigrants to talk about their love for their country. So you want to take it from there?
Yeah,
the
yeah.
love of
Yeah.
their country.
Yeah, sure.
So why immigrants want to show that they love their country more than Aboriginals do?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Okay. Ton loyalties. Being Chinese Malaysian, or Malaysian Chinese, depending on how you like to, identify yourself. Because we have different streams of school, and you and I went to Chinese school, at least for primary education. And
Don't tell people that because my Mandarin sucks though.
No. So your Mandarin is pretty good. No worries about that. And I received purely Chinese education up until high school. I only started to speak English after I, went to England. So we Chinese Malaysians happen to speak different languages, and then, but we live in a country that is predominantly Malays, Muslim, with Bahasa Malaysia being national language. Even the name itself, Bahasa Malaysia or Bahasa Melayu, is contentious. It is becoming more and more contentious these days. The point is that we have these torn loyalties. Torn loyalties actually not between Malaysia and China, as many of the political elite like to argue. For example, Mahathir Mohamad, the former prime minister, likes to
talk about that last
he
week,
likes he likes to talk about non-Malays still identifying with the countries of their home countries, China, India, and all that. No, to me, my conflict, to be very honest, I do have this very sense of conflicting loyalties, but not between Malaysia and China, but rather between Malaysia and my Chinese identity, my Chinese culture, because I happen to understand Chinese culture quite well. I speak fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, Hakka, Hainanese, and the rest of it. Tash Aw and I happen to be from a Hainanese background because his grandfather also was from Hainan Island, exactly the same as my grandparents. So I grew up speaking different languages. And after I started going to school, I started learning Malays, and I started to learn that Malaysia is my tanah air and all these things. So these torn and conflicting loyalties have been with me throughout my life. And even my family has been in this country for like 3-4 generations. We are still in some way perceived as pendatang or immigrants. Like you say, immigrants, wherever they are often requested or expected to declare their loyalty.
I will name a very good example
for the country,
after you finish.
Yeah, for the country of their birth, all the time, throughout their life.
Remember
right?
Suella Braverman?
Yes. Right, okay.
Give a bit context to
exactly. Suella Braverman is a
Home
British
Secretary.
Asian.
Yeah.
Her family is actually from East Africa, originally from India, but I think her grandparents moved from India to East Africa, and from East Africa the family moved to the UK and settled down there. And Suella Braverman is actually a British Asian. However, she actually she is a politician who is very much for British values, very much identifies with the British society, seeing herself as a fully British person, and she is very, very proud of the fact that she integrated quite well in British society,
And that's
right?
like-
And then she has to declare her loyalty to the UK time and time and time again. No thanks to the fact that she belongs to this traditional English party called the Conservatives.
We cannot deny that Suella Braverman probably needs to score some political points
Yeah,
and things
of course,
like that.
but I also
but
do
deep
believe that
down-
she genuinely
Yes.
believes that she is a success story.
Yeah.
She is what the white British community will see,
Yeah.
consider as a good immigrant. Perfect English, who has been, she speaks perfect English. She went to the top schools in the UK, and she was in some way very successful in her political career until recently. So I think she's very proud of the
How
fact
can
that
you
she
be called
made
successful
it in the UK
political
as an immigrant.
Yep.
Her family made it in the UK, and she's very proud of the fact. And also, I'm not discounting the fact that she is quite well received by her circle of friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out Suella Braverman is because aside from the fact that Josh and I are a big fan of British politics and we talked about it a lot, is because there's sometimes we observe from BAME politicians like Rishi Sunak
Yeah.
and Suella Braverman, they will more often than not go out of their way to show that they are indeed British.
Yeah.
This is the same phenomenon. That's why I'm not pointing out Chinese in Malaysia who probably, we felt that, like me and Josh, we always detected signals and things like that that says that, why are you showing your patriotism, when your love towards the country certainly did not merit that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't appreciate what the country has done for us, what the country has bring us and brought us, and we shouldn't be appreciate that this country at least in some ways are still a semblance of democracy. But we are pointing out what Tash has already pointed out in the book, is that there is some time that we have an extra debt as an immigrant. I'm actually, we are including all of us because I'm a third or fourth generation immigrant, and probably you are third generation immigrants.
Depending on which side of my
Yes.
family, my maternal grandmother's side has been in this country for 5 generations. Six generations.
Six.
Actually. My paternal parents' side is about 3-4 generations.
We always have this idea that we should do more, but in reality is that we shouldn't do more or do less. We should just do the level that we felt that we are comfortable with,
and not inconveniencing others, right?
And one thing I want to point out is that obviously this one I saw from a different reviews about talking about Tash, not in the book, but in the book he did try to review something about it, is that he is very, I call it, he's very, as a Chinese in Malaysia, you are very malleable in the sense that you can go to Taiwan, you can go to People's Republic of China, you can go to Hong Kong, and yet in the 3 different states and cities, right, different regions, right, you are still very comfortable about being there. Because I read this book, because I just recently came back a trip of Taiwan, then we decided to do this book, and I haven't finished this book, so I need to read it while I was on a trip to Taiwan. I find that it is a unique trait about Malaysian Chinese. It's because the education that we have, and because the people that we mix with, because we have Hokkiens, we have Hainan people. We're from Hakka, we have Guangdong,
Putian,
and
Henghua.
And it also thanks to
Guangsai,
thanks to the openness of Malaysia in incorporating all this different Chinese culture, especially from our Chinese forefathers and Chinese forefathers, right? We are very adaptable. We appreciate the uniqueness of Taiwan culture, China, People's Republic of China culture, and also Hong Kong culture, and we won't feel out of place going there. But it may not necessarily be the case for one Taiwanese who goes to China, for obviously political reasons. So I find this should be celebrated.
I think being Chinese Malaysian, we do have the advantages, but also we have to deal with the curse. The advantages would be what you just described, we can easily blend in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in mainland China, not to mention Singapore, which is culturally very close to Malaysia. Culturally, I'm not Singaporean friends, please do not take offense. I'm not saying that Singapore is like Malaysia, but culturally we share a lot of, similarities and all that. So do understand where I'm coming from. We can blend into these societies pretty easily because we speak their languages. I often, have to pretend to speak Taiwanese Mandarin more or less as a local.
How do you even speak Taiwanese Mandarin?
No, because I grew up watching Taiwanese dramas, listening to Taiwanese song, and now I went to a Chinese high school in Johor Bahru, Kwan Rou, and then in those days, there were a lot of teachers who graduated from Taiwan, or they themselves actually Taiwanese. So I acquired the accents. And then Hong Kong, like we grew up watching Hong Kong movies, TV series, TVB and all that, remember? I remember as a kid, I understood Cantonese perfectly well. But I didn't have a chance to really speak the language. I only started to speak Cantonese. I acquired spoken Cantonese after I went to London because I worked in Chinese restaurant, takeaway. I mingled with Hong Kong people. I lived with them. We actually share an apartment together and the rest of it. So that's how I acquire Hong Kong accent. So that's why when I first came back to KL from London after I completed my studies, I decided to move back to Malaysia for a while. When I started. Whenever I opened my mouth and spoke Cantonese, it would be the Hong Kong Cantonese that came out, and then people ask like, "你香港嚟㗎?" And then because I would use lui rather than 錢. I would say 錢 rather than lui, and I would say 溝 rather than 侵 and this and that. So people felt like, your Cantonese is very Hong Kong. So, and of course, like over the years, I started to mellow a bit. I started to adopt the local slang, Cantonese slang and all this.
Can we confidently say that this is the trait that only exclusive for Malaysian Chinese?
And Singaporean Chinese to some extent, yeah. And also it's not just Cantonese and Mandarin.
Yeah,
and even Malay language, right? I don't speak perfect Malay, but I'm interested in languages, so I try to, I try to, sort of acquire the accents, right? And I lived in Jakarta and Medan on and off for about 2 years. I also acquire some sort of Indonesian accent when I speak Bahasa. So I remember there was one time when I was, I ordered a taxi in Jakarta. I got into the car and then I started telling the driver, "Pak, aku mau pergi mana-mana." And then the driver turned around and asked me, "Pak, dari Medan kah?" You know why? Because for a Jakartan Betawi, whenever a Chinese speaking person speaking with a unique Chinese accent, when a Chinese person speaking Bahasa Indonesia with a unique Chinese accent, they often assume that the person is from Medan. You know why? Because more than 30% of the population in Medan is Chinese. They speak Hokkien, they speak Mandarin, of course they also speak very good Bahasa Indonesia, but they have sort of a Chinese accent that only Indonesians can tell. So it's like, aku dari Medan, and this and that. Also it's like, oh yeah, kita serumpun, and this and that. So it's like, actually, I was laughing inside. It's like, sebenarnya kita bukan serumpun, saya orang Cina, kamu orang Indonesia.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, this brings me to the interesting point that Tash Aw is driving at. Precisely. Playing with the accents, pretending to be someone else.
Can get you somewhere.
And get you somewhere. Yeah. And then you will get things done because you try to pretend to someone else. It's just like whenever I walk into a government office in Malaysia, whether it's MBPJ, whether it's DBKL, I would start speaking like a Malay, of course not perfect, but because my fluent Malay in that particular setting would help me considerably, and I will often get things done.
It's the same as migrant workers, currently these migrant workers came from Nepal, Bangladesh, who instantly picked up the language that they need. So it's the same thing. So viewers and listeners might ask, why do we spend so long dealing in this topic? Is because precisely there was this sentence that I remember quite fondly, in this book, is that when Tash went to Hong Kong. He was very welcome when he speak broken Cantonese. But obviously his Mandarin is better than Cantonese. But he was shunned away. He was shunned away. He was sort of like given a side eye look, and things like that. If he ever speaks Mandarin, when his Mandarin is much better than his Cantonese, as he has wrote in this book. So my point is that this way, the way that how Tash trying to write this book, and the way Tash trying to present, there's this central theme within it, is that us Chinese migrants here, we did our dues, and we learned, we adapt, and we had like the best of both worlds, in the sense that if you talk about Islam culture, if you talk about Malay culture, there are, I'm sorry to say that probably Taiwanese Chinese or
Taiwanese are not Chinese. They will argue that we are not Chinese. We are Taiwanese.
Sorry.
All right.
Sorry, Taiwanese.
Not all, but significant segment of Taiwanese society no longer identifies themselves as Chinese.
When I was in Taiwan also.
Learn your lesson.
I should be better. I'll do better Taiwanese. So Taiwanese, mainland Chinese, and even Hong Kong people, they would exhibit a bit of surprise and saying that why do we know so much about Islam culture, culture, or even things about happenings, development in Middle East. We'll much more appreciate the difficulties that was suffered by probably people from Sudan and people from Gaza. These are the values that we possess because of our unique identity. And all along, Tash Aw was trying to present this in his book, which is the central theme of it.
Actually, my conclusion is that, having read the book, my conclusion is that there's no point for you to pretend to be someone else. You just be yourself. You just be. Of course, we should try our best to learn a certain language in order to improve our communications with others. I'm definitely not against learning Bahasa Melayu. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Bahasa Melayu. I like the elegant part of the Malay language, especially when they use pantun and all these things. I really enjoy listening to.
So you must like our current Prime Minister.
Wow. Okay, that's another
that's
story.
A question for a different
Also,
episode.
I grew up watching P. Ramlee movies, and I really. I really miss the kind of Malay language in those days. It's very refined, it's very culture, very elegant, and so I'm actually not against learning Bahasa Melayu. It's just that do not force me to prove or to declare my loyalty by speaking perfect Malay. Nobody speaks perfect Malay. Just like nobody speaks perfect English, nobody speaks perfect Mandarin, Tamil, and the rest of it. And do not feel guilty. Like playing with accents is fun. I like playing with accents. But if you play with accents with the intention of strengthening your level of acceptance by others or sense of belonging, and eventually you will feel very disappointed, because in the context of Malaysia, being pendatang, being descendants of Chinese immigrants, no matter how much we try, we will never be enough. Even today, I start to speak perfect Malay and all that. The next step could be like, why don't you convert to Islam? Why don't you, since you already speak perfect Malay, maybe the next thing that you should consider is explore Islam and embrace religion? I don't know. It's just like the Philippines under Spanish colonialism had to adopt Spanish and also convert to Catholicism, and in order to be accepted by their white rulers. And the rest of it is history. Never feel guilty about your ethnic origins or your cultural origins. I remember one episode very well when I was working with UNHCR years ago. I had a Malaysian colleague of Indian origin once told me, like, I love traveling. I also love to explore India, she actually made it a point by saying, but I have to travel across Malaysia and understand Malaysia better before I go to India. And then I asked her why. Yeah, because Malaysia is my country. Of course, I have to understand my country better before I go to India. There's nothing wrong for you to explore India first before exploring Malaysia. Nobody can understand Malaysia 100%. If you want to understand Malaysia 100% before you go elsewhere, you would never go elsewhere. because you will never understand the country 100%. Nobody can.
Because-
not even
yeah.
Mahathir. Not even Anwar Ibrahim. Right? Nobody can.
No, even Tunku Abdul Rahman.
Exactly, right. Not to mention Sarawakians,
Yeah.
Sabahans,
I
right?
know it's a bit weird to say this, but if you put into context right now, but perhaps Tunku Abdul Rahman would be perceived to be less Malaysian under this kind of
Yeah, let's
interpretation.
be very frank. None of our, former prime ministers,
English
most of them,
educated,
most of them are English educated. Most of them actually, also have
Overseas graduates.
and overseas, they receive overseas education are the first four, right? Tunku Abdul Rahman and Tun Razak and Tun Hussein On, and then
Mahathir's in Singapore technically.
and
First
so
three.
the first three, and then starting from Mahathir is like all locally educated, but most of them also what we consider not pure Malay, because they have Siamese origin, they have Bugis, Turkish. Hussein On's family actually had Turkish connections, and of course Mahathir. Like we still, even until today, Mahathir still cannot face up to the fact that his father's side originated from India.
He did.
From,
Zahid Hamidi made him.
Everybody
but
knows
that's a
it.
different story.
From Kerala,
Yeah.
right? From Kerala, Malayali Muslim, right? Everybody knows it, right? So, but he pretends to be someone else, and you can see how hard he is trying to identify himself as Malay, and he ends up victimizing others in order to strengthen his Malay credentials. He in turn victimizes other people, saying that you are not like me. I already ditched my Indian identity by speaking perfect Malay and this and that. You will never be enough. Yeah, no matter how hard you try, you'll never be enough.
So we just want to end this with a quote from the former British Prime Minister, which Josh will go ahead and explain why would he wanted to he told me before this he wanted to mention this quote, is that which we will go back to explain, which sort of like explain a lot of things that we just discussed, and also about the book. So before we go there, we just want to talk about, for Strangers on a Pier is really about just be yourself. And for Tash, he has a very awkward sense of definition of home, because he talked about sometimes he stay in Paris, sometimes he stay in London, then he occasionally comes
actually
back.
he mentions a lot of the places that he has been to.
And he comes back to Malaysia.
He's a well-traveled, world-trotting author from Malaysia.
And he could speak Japanese. I'm sure he will stay in Japan for a while. And that makes him a citizen of nowhere.
Theresa May.
So,
all right, yes. Former British Prime Minister Theresa May famously made this statement at the Conservative Party conference in 2016. If you believe that you are a citizen of the world, you are a citizen of nowhere. Theresa May, I have to tell you, I think identity is not something predetermined, unchanging. Identity is something that constantly evolving. It is plastic, it is moldable, and it can change. It is situational. It can change depending on the situations that you are in. Yeah, as simple as that.
Yeah, just as different Chinese has different traits,
That's right. Yeah,
mainland China Chinese and Taiwanese and Malaysian and Hong Kong people, we are all in some ways Chinese, but we are not really similar. So that's where we ended, and that's where I think Tash is been wanting to speak about this book. I also wanted to talk about the second part of the book just before we end, is that he spent quite like at least more than half of the book talking about his grandma, and I was someone who is also brought up by my grandma because of my working parents, and it speaks a lot to me, and it reminds me a lot about my grandma also, my late grandma, and just wanted to give a shout out to my grandma, and just hopefully everyone will enjoy this book. We strongly recommend that you read this hand in hand together. Probably you could start with the memoir first, then you go to the South. I think that's where once you have an idea who Tash Aw is in his memoir, then you will better appreciate the South. And obviously he has other books like which has internationally recognized, right? And there's the Harmony Silk Factory, which was the winner of the White Bread First Novel Award and the Commonwealth Writer Prize for Best First Novel. And there's this famous book, We the Survivors, also. So we should celebrate this Malaysian author. Go back to our first segment, is that not to deny his assistant, not to deny what he has wrote, not to ban or not to prohibit what he has written and what he's trying to share, but to celebrate it. Even if you don't agree with it, debate about it, engage with it, and me and Josh will be more than happy to engage with anyone who disagree with in a civilized platform and manner that we can continue to talk about this book. And once again, Tash Aw, The South, Strangers on a Pier, good book, read about it, and we'll see you next in the third episode of Read Baby Read. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.